Hi, I'm Isaac, also known as Fishku Online, and in this video I'll show you how to use and configure the blur fill shader, which I have recently ported to GLSL. Shoutouts to Count0, who is a member of several handheld gaming related Discord servers, who has motivated me to do this port. This port allows it to run on more devices. Specifically, Count0 has asked me if it can be run on the Powkitty RGB30 device, which has a square 1:1 aspect ratio display with a resolution of 720 by 720 pixel. So in this demo, I'm going to use the same square resolution on my PC. So what does the shader actually do? In this case, I've loaded up CoolSpot for the SNES. And if I go into the game, you'll see that there are black borders around the game's content. And that's because the resolution and the aspect ratio of the game don't really match the one of the device. So the shader allows us to fill these black borders with a blurred version of the content. Let me show you how to get the shader. So first, I'm pressing F1 to go to the menu. I'm going down to the online updater, and I'm going down to update slang shaders. So in some cases, this is going to say update GLSL shaders, which is dependent on the graphics driver. On the same screen in the bottom left corner, you'll see the version of RetroArch. So the shader requires at least a 1.16 version of RetroArch, and we have 1.18 as we can see here, which is a newer version, so that's going to work fine. So another thing we'll want to do is change the video settings. So I'll go out of the menu, go into settings, video, scaling, turn off integer scale, and set the aspect ratio to full. And what this is going to do is it will stretch the content to fill the whole screen. Of course, we don't want to run the game at the full aspect ratio, but we will need all the pixels of the screen to be available to the shader, which is what these settings do. And we will set the actual aspect ratio and other scaling options in the shader itself. So now that we have set the settings correctly, let me go back out of the settings into the quick menu and jump down to shaders and load this preset. So it's going to be in shaders slang, or it could also be in shaders GLSL depending on your platform, in the border directory. And there are three presets here: a regular one, then a version with a stronger blur effect, and one with a weaker blur effect. So let me load the default one. After loading the preset and going back into the game, you'll notice that the aspect ratio is now 8:7, which is the SNES's native aspect ratio. So that's what the shader is going to use by default. Let me show you how to set the different shader parameters. So below the load preset menu item, we have the shader parameters. So let me explain the relevant parameters one by one to you. So first off, we have the force aspect ratio parameter in the scaling parameters. And I'll recommend to leave this on because if we turn this off, it's going to stretch the image again to be the full aspect ratio. And we want to control the aspect ratio. Below that, we have the horizontal aspect ratio and the vertical aspect ratio values. And you'll notice that both are set to 0 by default. What this means is it's going to use a native aspect ratio. So it's going to use the same aspect ratio as the core provides. And if we change that to say 4 and 3, and I'm going back to the game now, you'll notice that we now have a 4:3 aspect ratio shown on the screen. And below that, we have the force integer scaling parameters. So we can do that both horizontally and vertically. So if I turn this on horizontally, for example, you'll notice we have a little bit of smaller image. That's because we're doing a pixel perfect integer scaling. And this is going to enforce a 1x, 2x, 3x, 4x, and so on scaling. And I should note at this point that even if you turn it off, like we see here, that there's a sharp resampling algorithm called pixel anti-aliasing, or pixel AA, which I have also developed, that is built into the blur fill shader. And so even if you're not using a pixel perfect integer scaling, it should still look pretty sharp, especially on a sharp display like the RGB30s. And so the next setting is the overscale setting. This works similarly as it does in RetroArch itself. So if it's set to 0, it's going to show the full content on the screen. And if I start increasing, it's going to blow up the content until we reach the value of 1, at which point the top and bottom edges of the content touch the top and bottom edges of the display. And let me reset that quickly. and show you another setting that's popular for SNES and NES. So they have a 8:7 aspect ratio, as I've said before. And we can set the integer scale for pixel perfect scaling for the best sharpness. And then if I start increasing the overscale, at some point the image is going to become bigger right now. And if we look at the game right now, you'll see that it cuts off a few pixels on the left and on the right side because we have a wider aspect ratio than the screen and we're doing overscaling. However, it's not too bad, and in most of these older games, these border pixels weren't really used for a lot. And so this offers a good compromise of filling the screen, having a sharp integer scaling, and just cutting off a few pixels on the left and on the right. Okay, next up, let me start the game actually to show you what the crop parameters do. So when I start the game, you'll notice that there are some black bars still at the top and the bottom of the screen. And these are actually in the game. And these are also called overscan. And if I go to the menu, I can crop the top and the bottom by increasing these parameters. So I increase the overscan crop top parameter, and I also crop the bottom in the same way. And I just go back and forth until I realize that all the black pixels have gone. And so a setting of 7 and 12 for this game looks good. So if I move around now, you'll notice there's no more disconnect between the foreground, I mean the game, and the background, which is the blurred version of the game. And this looks good for this game. So again, if you like a preset for a specific game and you like the settings, you can go to Save Preset. And you can save the shader as a specific preset for this game. Okay, I've explained the scaling and the cropping parameters. Let me show you the last set of parameters that are most important. And for this, I'm going to load a Game Boy Advance game, in this case, Golden Sun. And of course, since the GBA was a 3:2 aspect ratio device, it's going to look terrible on the 1:1 screen if you just stretch it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to load the shader. It's going to be in the same place as before. And in this case, I'm going to use the stronger blur effect because we have more pixels to fill. And I think in this case, the stronger blur effect looks nice. And one look I like for the GBA is if we have the game content flush with the top of the display. And we can use the shift parameters for this. So I'm moving down in the parameters list and we're going to apply a vertical shift. And by setting this to a negative value, we're shifting the game content up pixel by pixel. So I think in this case, the correct value is going to be -40. So let me set that. And just like that, we have a game content that's perfectly flush with the top of the device. And so there's a few more settings here that you can play around with, but most of them you don't need to change. There's just one more which I would like to show you, which is the fill extension. So we can extend, in this case, the fill vertically, for example. And if I turn this setting on, you'll notice that the blur fill at the bottom of the screen, it stays even throughout, up to the border of the display. If I turn it off, you'll instead get a fade. So it's brighter near the content and it fades to black when we get to the border of the display. So there's a few more parameters, but I'm not going to talk about them in detail in this video. I encourage you to just play around with them. Again, if you find a set of parameters that works well, you can save it as a preset, not just for the game, but even, let's say, for the whole core. And if you find any bugs or if you have any requests about features, things like that, you can contact me on Discord and hopefully I can help you out with whatever it is. Yeah, that's it. Happy gaming and I hope you enjoy. Thank you.